Welcome to Sparks by PRCA, a podcast series channel. This episode is part of the podcast series special, Mindful Communicators, promoting mental resilience. Hi, and welcome again. My name is Patrick Melville. I run Melville Mental Solutions, and I'm working with PRCA to build the mental resilience in the industry. Mental health is a global theme, relevant to everybody. I'm so pleased to have a senior industry lead based in Dubai and works globally. Welcome, Scott Armstrong, founder of Mentl.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for having me on.
A pleasure. I look forward to discussing the role of mental resilience in your work and what you do. Let's go into the question one. What are the stress drivers you've seen in the region and perhaps how they affect the broader audience?
Well, I'd spent 2 years specifically working for a communications agency, so I've felt this firsthand. We've kind of got a double-edged sword here. It's like blessing and curse, because in this part of the world, in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia, and recently in Qatar as well, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of ambition. There is a lot of work. There is a lot of opportunity, but that also then leads into a lot of working hours that are required.
Yes.
This is a market that is also quite last minute, so we have pretty brutal deadlines. There's big budgets, but with those big budgets, they seem to think that they can throw enough money at people and the comms professionals will turn around decks. In 24 hours, they'll be working until 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's tough. It's, as I say, it's a blessing and a curse. There's really exciting work. We've got countries that are really ambitious that are doing massive projects. So it's very rewarding. Very recently, people have been working on the Qatar World Cup and all that kind of thing. And then the Saudis bid for the next World Cup and all that kind of thing. So there's masses of work, masses of expectation, masses of pressure, and that's leading to really high burnout rates in this region. We're seeing figures where I think in the UAE, there's a Cigna Vitality study, and 99% of people that responded to the survey said they'd struggled with at least one symptom of burnout. 90% of them had been dealing with stress, and 90% of them said they felt always on. And I think a full third of them, 32%, said they were basically working outside of normal working hours all the time. And the global average for that is 20%.
And you mentioned the signs. Could you give a couple of the signs of burnout?
Well, I mean, there's several different signs, but you begin to kind of lose your passion for things. That tends to, you start isolating yourself from other people, particularly within your team. That isolation is really bad for you physically. It's as bad as smoking, I think, 12 or 14 cigarettes a day. The US Surgeon General came out just a few months ago. There was a new piece of scientific research on that. You stop looking after yourself. So your physical health declines because you stop looking after yourself. Your energy levels decline, and as you imagine, your kind of creative skills, your creative thinking skills also go into decline. All of which is not great for a profession where you're often expected to be creative and think creatively.
Yes.
And have really high energy, because it's quite demanding. It can be really demanding, particularly if you're delivering an event for a client.
Yes, yeah. And the expectations, I think that was a strong word as well, with all these timings and all this hard agenda. I mean, of course, in the PR and comms industry, that is prominent all over the world, and the conversation we've already had on the podcast already.
The problem with it is the always on of it as well, because look, no industry doesn't come without its levels of stress, and there's always going to be those moments where you need to kind of operate at 120, 130%, go above and beyond. But it's that always on, and that's what's leading to people burning out. We're seeing disengagement levels in this region, but also globally. It's like sort of 70% of employees are disengaged from the work they're doing, and that's part and parcel to do with burnout as well, and that's costing industry money.
Really? Wow. And of course, the companies as well and clients, I bet their performance levels must be affected as well. It's prominent that this research shows these numbers and of course backups the burnout that you were explaining. What it's really important also to know what the methods are to to manage these effects, to manage these thoughts and feelings. What are the methods you use in your company and your work to build the resilience with your staff and also your clients, and to help them take on these challenges?
Well, it's multi-layered. I mean, and there is not one size fits all solution to this. That's
Yes.
one of the perhaps the challenges for companies when we're talking about mental health and well-being. We are essentially kind of strategists and storytellers that help companies pull together a kind of coherent narrative around sort of employee well-being. We do see companies, even well-meaning companies, you know, there's the term well-washing now. But even well-meaning companies that will bring in and do a mindfulness session, or
Yeah.
will bring in a team building specialist, they'll do that as a one-off, and not realize that if you don't have the communication, if you've not had the conversation at a cultural level inside your organization, then employees aren't really going to feel they can engage. Have you created psychological safety? Because quite often, a lot of these well-being initiatives can end up being like the pool table in the middle of the room, which nobody dare play on. You know,
Yeah.
everybody's expected to work 24/7. So we go in and basically encourage companies to have that really deeply honest conversation with themselves about the culture inside those organizations, because without that foundation, anything after that is a bit of a waste of money, really. I mean, all of these initiatives are fantastic if they're brought in to a culture where the employees feel that they are empowered to step forward and to express concerns and to access, you know, mental health services and wellbeing services without companies weaponizing it against them.
I see. It's interesting, the synergies also between the work in the PR and com space, the fact that clients will come on and say, hi, I've got like a bit of money and I need to do a message now, when in fact the goal is to get that message longer. I mean, time is such an important thing, isn't it? And I would have thought the routine and then putting it into the daily schedules, like that well-being washers, they tend to just forget. Or I mean,
Yeah,
any message, any brand message, you need to
absolutely.
keep it top of mind.
But it really gels with, particularly, you know, you think about the work that the PR and the communications industry do. We
Yeah.
tell clients that they have to be consistent and constant with their messaging.
Yes.
And the organization itself needs to be exactly the same about its culture. It needs to keep telling employees you are safe, you are seen, you are heard, you are valued. And if you are struggling, you can reach out. Because if it doesn't do that, the kind of default setting that we've created in the world at large is hierarchies of fear, and they're the things that we've got to, you know, break down.
It's interesting also that this balance, how do you describe the word sort of where resilience comes in? Because of course stress will happen, and it's manage and cope in that moment. But then of course building that culture to maybe after a meeting, maybe after sort of a full night of work to pitch, when that happens, what comes to mind and sort of what you've seen and what you work with?
Well, look, honesty and vulnerability at the leadership level really, really helps. So, are you a human being who can actually talk to your team? And it seems like the simplest thing, but
Yeah.
thank you, and sorry seem to be two of the hardest words, you know, in industry, and particularly in C-suites. We find that, you know, leaders that can express vulnerability, and this means that they don't have to, you know, break down and cry, but people who can be honest and can also listen first. Can you allow your employees to talk, or do you sit there in the meeting and tell them what you think? Because after that, you shut down any kind of debate or any possibility for your team to feel that they can contribute something without you know, that either disagrees or doesn't gel with what you've just told them at the top of the meeting. So it's kind of creating psychological safety, basically. That's a real key driver. And then the big two things I would say on that is, you know, this conversation has to happen at the top, but it also has to happen in the middle. And
Yes.
line managers are basically responsible for 70% of an employee's well-being. And that means that 30%, you know, the employee can impact it themselves. but there's an outsized responsibility and an outsized impact that line managers have on their employees. So there's that. And then it has to be delivered, strategy is conceived at the top, but it's delivered at the bottom. So it doesn't matter what entry level you're at, there needs to be that conversation there. And everybody needs to feel psychologically safe, from the security guard that greets you as you walk in. That individual can set the tone for your day.
Yes. And where do you find the opportunities or maybe the challenges to help with those opportunities at the moment? Is it the leaders? Is it the managers? Is it just under this branding, this culture, this well-being?
Yeah, I mean, it is a cultural thing, because our C-suites, unfortunately, are overpopulated by men of a certain age who look like me, no hair, beard, bit grey. And unfortunately, we need younger leaders, and we need, a better gender mix inside the boardroom, because one of the big key drivers moving forward for any business to succeed is having emotional intelligence, and that plays massively into resilience. McKinsey did a big study of the 10 qualities that all leaders will need to
Yes.
thrive over the next 10 years, and fully 6 of them were linked to emotional intelligence and your ability to listen to your people and inspire your people, which is a scary thing for many leaders, because before, leaders were promoted because they were good at a process. They were never expected to actually kind of lead from the front or be that kind of Ted Lasso figure. But
Yeah.
increasingly, especially with Gen Z and Gen Alpha coming after them, the human touch is more and more required.
And it's interesting when you also add the big sector at the moment, AI coming in, that process
Absolutely.
obviously is being taken away. So interesting, that kind of
Yes,
inspiring
absolutely.
side
No.
is a really interesting thing. And I suppose, what are your thoughts about using that, what those 5 areas that you're saying as a kind of toolkit to be able to use that emotions to really build a business, to really
Yeah.
them grow financially as well as retaining talent? Anything that you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's huge risk and reward here as well for organizations. I mean, in the UAE alone, the companies are losing $5 million an hour. It's like $10.3 billion a year. And we've seen, if a company can get this right and start moving the needle on well-being inside their organization, absenteeism is going to go down. And I've seen, there's reports and figures around sort of 38% reduction in absenteeism straight away. You get increased engagement, you get talent attraction, more, as well as, which is really important for the future of your company, but you've also got talent retention.
Mm.
And to replace an employee costs far more than it actually does
Yeah.
to keep an employee. You've got productivity gains. The World Economic Forum has shown that an engaged workforce is at least 20% more productive. So it really is good business, because you've got less absenteeism,
Mm.
presenteeism. That disengagement, presenteeism, actually costs businesses more than absenteeism, because if somebody's off, then somebody picks up the slack. But if you've got team members and 70% of your team are sat at their desks and they're not fully engaged and they're not delivering the work, that's
Mm.
costing you that money. So it is good business to be a good
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. And what's good is that you've highlighted those numbers, and I think, are they used as a metric to record the positive outcomes? I mean, what are the ones that you've experienced that you would maybe say to a listener to just to notice and maybe use it in their own business?
Well, and again, we talk about risk. I talk about risk and reward, and if you're looking at your business, yes,
Yeah.
look at all those metrics. And too few organizations actually piece all this together. They tend to go into a conversation around well-being in their organizations with confirmation bias. So
Mm.
they're looking to do an engagement. They'll do a pulse survey, and how many people how many of your team have actually engaged with the pulse survey? So if only 40% of your organization have even engaged with that, then you're not getting the true picture. But many HR departments who do this on the behalf of leaderships
Yeah.
often go looking for that confirmation bias. So can you have that honest conversation? Remember, $10.3 billion going out the door here in the UAE. The return on investment, however, and I always look at a study of 100 studies. So there's been hundreds of these studies. One study by the Human Resources Organization calculated the average from 100 different studies, and that was 327%
Yeah.
return on investment. So if you're looking at it from those, just from the cold hard numbers,
Yeah.
risk versus reward, just you can have because we always like to say that we'd love to get the leaders in the heart, but we know we have to make the business case for this, and there genuinely is a business case for this.
Yes, I know. And the financial lead is obviously the one you need to sort of to justify it to, and that's one of the things. A lot of what you've been mentioning are sort of global themes, and of course in the UK, I know that this happens also. So you said the word absenteeism, presenteeism, staff retention. If there was a sort of one metric that you think, I mean, because there might be some people who are thinking, well, that's lovely to know that's happening in Dubai. Well done. What about, what would be relative to like a metric, again, performance for let's say a UK agency or another country's agency, just to consider, maybe to take away?
Well, I would be looking at you to start with. I would be looking at your talent retention, your attrition, or how many people are walking out the door, and what's the turnaround time. And we can see stress levels globally, but also regionally here. I've actually increased in many respects. Stress is not going down. So what's the turnaround time on your talent? Because, and again, with AI, that's going to remove a lot of processes. What you really, really need, I mean, the two things can be true at the same time, that AI is the future of humanity, but humanity is the future of humanity as well.
Mm.
And actually having talented human beings inside your organization is going to be incredibly important. So that's just the first part, I guess, to look at, that the attrition, how many people are walking out the door. And there's another reason why you should be looking at that, because increasingly investors are looking at companies and basing their decisions on whether they will invest in a company on things such as their Glassdoor score. And if nothing should strike fear into the hearts of HR departments more, is that your company's ability to raise investment is linked to what employees say when they leave you.
That's a really good point. And as we look into 2024,
Mm.
what are the things that you would recommend, or are you considering for, to build this resilience theme that we're discussing? What are the things that you
I
think?
think the first step, I mean, I know this, we say that time is money. The
Mm.
first step that lots of companies should do is actually go, right, what's the allotment of time that we are going to put into our diaries, our Outlook calendars, to focus on the mental health and the well-being of our teams, of our talent. It can't be ad hoc. Cigna, who we do quite a lot of work with, sort of regionally and globally, they have a great campaign called the 5% Pledge. And they're trying to get leaders to, throughout the organization, both at a middle management level and a top management, to devote 5% of their time to mental health and well-being, and basically just having that exploration. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but if you think of a single CEO, that's 2.5 hours a week blocked off in their Outlook calendar. That adds up to more than 100 hours in a year for the leader of the organization to be purely focused on, right, what do we need? Because every industry is different, and every industry, some can offer flexible working, some can offer remote working, some industries, very difficult to do that. Hospitality, fortunately for PR and comms, that is an ability. But then if you've got an event, then you can't phone an event in, you can't remote work an event.
Yes.
So it's building that time in to focus on, what does my company need to look at, and what's the story we can tell? How can we create psychologically safety? And that's one individual. So if you then take
Yes.
your senior leadership team, you've got 10 people, that's 1,000 hours. I mean, that's something you can do something incredible with inside your organization. So building that time in. And I would also say, I love that in our own sort of, we talk about the employee's life. Again, how many of us in the Outlook calendar, we have an Outlook calendar,
Mm.
which we use for work, but how much personal time do we build into that?
Yeah.
So kind of take your own 5% pledge, actually put in time to make sure that you are showing up for yourself and you are having a conversation with yourself. because how often do we actually go, right, I'm going to, on Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, I'm going to sit and just have think about my mental health, or I'm going to think about, make sure that I am going to the gym, or I am going for a walk,
Yes.
or I am having a sit down conversation with someone who's going to support me.
Mm.
So yeah, show up for yourself and build the time into your personal diary, and also companies build the time in
Yeah.
to have that conversation. I
Yeah.
think that's the foundation.
Yes. I think it's your classic sort of marketing pitch and your PR pitch. Sometimes you say inside the business, this is how we work. Therefore, the trust that you give us the trust to deliver the campaign that we're putting
Yeah.
forward. And of
That's a
course,
really important word as well there for organizations is
yeah.
trust. Do your employees trust you to look after them?
Our last question is for you is, if there were one or two pieces of advice you would give to the listener, wherever they are, in Dubai, in the UK, any other country, place, what would they be when they go back to work?
I would say stop, evaluate. How are you? And ask you and start that conversation with yourself. How are you? How are you really? How are you coping? And then I would say, never believe that you are alone in this, because you're not. The figures show us that the majority of us will struggle at some point or have struggled. So reach out, find that person you can talk to. I'd also say that, don't be afraid of therapy. We often look at therapy as a response to a crisis. We wait for things to break. Actually, you'll
Great.
go to you'll go to the gym to look after your body, but what are you doing for your mental health? Because basically it's all one system. Your physical and mental health are connected, and if one struggles, the other will struggle as well. So look at therapy, or look at least mental health from a kind of preventative thing. Don't wait for your car to break down, and you don't wait for your car to break down. You service your car to make sure it doesn't break down. Well, you are at least as important as your car, at least. So service yourself, service your own mental health. And I've lent in, just literally in the last 6 months, we had to go to therapy because I wasn't overwhelmed, but I could see I was on the path to getting overwhelmed by a big project that we were trying to deliver. And I went back into the therapy. Self-compassion is a big thing, and often the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, how often do we call ourselves losers? How often do we put ourselves down? How often do we invent stories in our heads of what clients actually think about us? We've no way to know. So it is that kind of, yeah, just stop. What's the story you're telling yourself? What's the conversation you're having with yourself? And how are you? And that would be my advice. And then reach out and talk.
That's lovely. Thank you. I mean, I think also the word sharing is a very strong word, to share with yourself, and such a simple, but sometimes it's a bit of practice as well, isn't it? I think we can't expect ourselves just to do it straight away. There'll be our minds, let alone people, will be interrupting, thinking there are things more important.
Yeah, and I would say as well, like with all the responsibilities we have, and we do, like I'm a husband, I'm a father, and we were running a company, or you're an employee. If you're a manager, you've got a responsibility to your C-suite, to your P&L, to your team, to your mortgage payment, to your school fees. I mean, it's a lot of pressure. But you are the foundation of all of that. So self-care is not selfish. You do need to make time for yourself, to look after yourself.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Scott, for your time. And I look forward to listening to this, and obviously following up. And of course, your details will be on the page if should anyone want to get in touch. Thank you
Brilliant. Well, thank you.
so
And thanks
much.
for having the conversation. Like, the more we normalize this conversation, the more we have it, the better we are.